Hello and welcome back to Bites of History. My name is Irene Walton and I'm your host, Irene Walton. Was that correct? Hi, welcome back to Bites of History with Irene Walton. I'm your host, Irene Walton. There we go. Let's get it started.
Ever wondered how it made it to your table? Have you ever wondered how it made it to your shelf? If you love food, then this is the show for you. Bites of History with Irene.
We're going to get right into today's episode. I know you're going to be so upset that I'm not just blathering on for the first 4 minutes, but here we find ourselves. A quick thank you to all of my little producers and every patron that I have in my Patreon. Little Producers is the $2 tier that you can join, and it helps me out a lot. And you guys have input on episode ideas, and I show you like little secret little things, and it's cute. It's very fun. If you want to join, it is only $2 and it helps me out quite a bit. So thank you to everyone in the Patreon. And thank you to Sophie Hand for sending me some little research coffee snack cash on Venmo. That was very sweet of you. Thank you. Are you ready to take a weird, spooky dive into the historical food facts of the Titanic? I am. But first, we have to thank our sources. Wikipedia.com, TitanicBelfast.com, TitanicFandom.com, Tasting History, the Tasting History YouTube channel, and TitanicFacts.net. Okay, so before we dive fully in, before we sink our teeth into the Titanic story is not quite as like point A, point B, point C type of thing like we've had with like Starbucks and Krispy Kreme and like all this stuff, because like, of course we all know where the Titanic is now. And if you don't, I have a very upsetting story ahead. But the food on that ship has always been so curious to me, because like I would imagine that the main source of knowledge that most of us have of the Titanic is from the movie Titanic, which, what a joy. Oh my God. One time, let me just tell you something really quickly. One time I was on a trip with my ex-boyfriend, and we were in a hotel and we weren't like going to do anything crazy that night. So we were just going to stay in. So we turned on the TV and Titanic was just starting. It was like when Rose is at the pottery wheel and she's an old lady, and we looked at each other and we were both like, this is the best night ever. So it was amazing. So yeah, most of us probably have our knowledge of what happened on the Titanic from that movie, which it is a pretty historically accurate movie, like kind of. I was always just like so enchanted by the like fanciness and fine diningness of, that's most certainly not a word. Wow, all of my food credentials just got revoked. Fine diningness. The way that they dined on that ship seemed amazing and so weird and cool. And I wanted to learn about it. So I did. So to start with, we have the British shipping company, the White Star Line, and they made 3 Olympic-sized ocean liners, one of them being the Titanic. The Titanic was actually the RMS Titanic, which stands for the Royal Mail Ship. So they had a ton of mail on there, as well as passengers, and we're about to find out a lot of food. Now, all of these White Star Line ships, all 3 of them, were thought up in 1907 by Bruce Ismay, who was one of the chair members of the White Star Line, as well as the financier, as well as the finance guy, JP Morgan. That JP Morgan, who you're thinking of, who's still like a finance name, he was also a part of this decision. So they wanted to create these big, massive, like resorts on the sea, basically. And they did just that with all 3 of them. Now, the full carrying capacity of the Titanic was about 3,500. So this had 2,500 passengers could come aboard and 900 crew members. It allowed for the third class to have about 1,000 passenger capacity, the second class to have about 600, and the first class to have about 800. Now, the ship is not full when it takes off on April 10th, 1912, but we do have 2,240 people aboard. Now, one of the contributing factors of there being about 1,000 less people than the ship could allow for was at this time in 1912 in the UK, there was a coal strike going on, which really like dampened people's travel plans. Either they didn't go on the ship because they were worried about the coal strike and they were like, oh, there's not going to be enough coal. Or they simply weren't able to get to the dock to board the ship. So they missed their like big RMS Titanic adventure, which I'm sure they were not too upset about 5 days later. Now, there are a lot of tricky parts about this time in history that I think are important to understand the food of the Titanic. One of the determining factors that was tricky about this time in history and boarding the Titanic was that class used to be based, like where your class in society, I don't think that that's a very nice word, but the hierarchy of society was based on your money as well as your societal status. However, when we're going into the early 1900s, we're seeing that it's becoming a lot more finance-based. So somebody who started in a really, really poor family that maybe hit it really big in the gold rush or, got super popular in the industrial steel industry, they could make a lot of money. And then now all of a sudden they're in first class, which, as you could imagine, the quote unquote old money didn't like because they're all stuffy. And they were like, we're rich and popular. You can't just be rich and sit with us. They were really upset that somebody who maybe grew up in a not great area or in a not great situation could then be sitting next to them or sitting next to royalty. And it caused a lot of disruption. And that's what you'll kind of see in the movie when we meet Molly, who is played by Kathy Bates. She's new money, and Rose and her family, and Calhoun and whatever, they're old money. So they're we're better than her, even though we both have the same amount of money. Ours is older and ours is more real. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And the White Star Line knew about this. They were not surprised that the old money was pissed that new money was going to be a part of their so fancy first class. Now, prior to this point in oceanic travel, being on a ship, if you were in first or second class, you had meals provided for you included in your ticket price. However, because of this new money, old money discrepancy, the Titanic borrowed this idea that a couple of other ships had tried where they were yeah, there's first class, but then there's also an extra first class because we're different. So the RMS Titanic decided, okay, we're going to do that same thing. We're going to have super nice first class. Oh my God, so pretty, so cute. We love. But also there's going to be a special restaurant that you have to pay extra for. And you can get all of your meals at this restaurant and it's fancier than even the first class, but it's extra. And so a lot of the old money people were like, well, great, I have so much money and I'm extra fancy. So it went over very well. Their idea was well received. Now, this dining experience was called the Olympic class. Get over yourself. And me, if I had the chance to go to the Olympic class, I'd be like, see you there. But it was all a la carte menu. You didn't have a set menu. It was very they definitely played it up for you. It also had to be booked in advance, so you couldn't just walk in like you could at the other restaurants and be like, hey, I'm here for breakfast. You had to make an appointment to be there. It was operated by a very celebrated Italian restaurateur. It was called The Restaurant. It was decorated in Louis XVI style, which a lot of the Titanic was, just ornate wood carvings, but like enamel walls, just beautiful and so Bouge Town, USA, population 2,240, So the restaurant is actually designed after the Ritz-Carlton, and it's just meant to be wow, I am spending so much money. I'm so important. I'm so much better than everyone else, even in the regular old boring first class. For example, meals at the restaurant, remember, were $19.12, would be $7, $8.50, and $12. And that's not adjusting for inflation. So it's you're definitely spending a good amount extra every day just to eat in this special place. So now we're getting into the juicy part of the food and how they brought on food and how they planned all of this, because I'm absolutely fascinated by that. So I'm going to read off the manifest of stuff that they brought. They bought 75,000 pounds of fresh meat, 25,000 pounds of fresh poultry, 11,000 pounds of fresh fish, 7,000 heads of lettuce, 40 tons of potatoes. That's 80,000 pounds of potatoes. Is it? Yes. 36,000 oranges, 13,000 grapefruit. Oh, I wonder if they brought so much citrus because of scurvy. Interesting. 250 barrels of flour, 800 pounds of tea, 40,000 fresh eggs, 1,200 quarts of ice cream, 15,000 bottles of ale, 1,000 bottles of wine, and 850 bottles of liquor. Now, this wasn't all they brought. This was just a rough, estimate of, everything. It's not broken down to exactly what came on the ship. There was also a lot of canned food, a lot of dessert type stuff, more fresh fruit. You can find that they had grapes and peaches and things like that. But it's just almost unfathomable. How do they keep that all fresh? How do they store it all? It's so interesting to me. So when it comes to the actual meals aboard the Titanic, they're all really heavily coursed out. They're having 4 different meals a day. And within that, there are usually about 3 to 7 courses within each one, depending on your class. Those meals were breakfast, dinner. I don't know why they call it dinner, but that's in everything I read. It was just they were calling lunch dinner. So there's breakfast, dinner, tea, and supper. Supper is basically a late night snack. Tea seems to be dinner. Lunch is dinner. And breakfast is breakfast. And to just give you a rough idea of what these meals sort of look like, for breakfast, the first class, not in the restaurant, we're getting baked apples, fresh fruit, stewed prunes, Quaker oats, puffed rice, boiled hominy, fresh fish, smoked salmon, grilled ham, steak, eggs, omelets, buckwheat cakes, rolls, cornbread, caviar, lobster, quail. You were able to pick quite a few things. It was a hefty breakfast if you're in first class or if you're in third class and anywhere in between, so second class. And the second class food was amazing. A lot of the accounts from the second class that we have from the survivors were the food was the best I've ever had. It was rich and there was so much of it and it was just so good. And people were very impressed by the food in the second class, dining halls, because a lot of it was just from the first class. A lot of it was the first class's, dinner from the first night would then be the second class's dinner the fourth night. Not leftovers, but just, you're not going to make 80,000 different meal ideas. If you're going to have chicken lyonnaise one night, you can probably give it to the second class group a couple nights later and they have chicken lyonnaise, And the meals were all signified with a different instrument, which I thought was interesting. The first class's meal indicator was a trumpet or a bugle. The second class's meal indicator was a gong, and the third class meal indicator was a bell. And that's how you knew dinner was ready or breakfast was ready or whatever. And you could go to your assigned dining hall, which was separated by class, and have your meal. Oh, I learned this and I thought it was so cute. This dining structure is actually where we get the term from soup to nuts. Most of the time, the beginning of your meal would start with the soup. And then at the end, after dessert, you would get a little bowl of assorted nuts. And one of the accounts of a woman in second class who was writing her sister after the, horrible sinking of the ship was filling her in on the experience up until that point and was oh my goodness, the meals were so extravagant and lovely. I stayed from soup to nuts. And I thought that was so cool and cute. Whoa, look at that. Look at history. Now, something that was very interesting about the Titanic as opposed to other ships that had been ocean bound prior is the third class dining experience actually fed the passengers. Now you're saying, what the heck? You're on a cruise. Of course you're fed. Up until this point, the third class was expected to bring their own food and a lot of the time their own utensils and cutlery. So not only did you have to bring your own friggin' meal on a ship for X amount of days, you also had to have your own plates and forks, which just sounds terrible. And when it comes to what the third class had for their actual meals, it seems as though they're not quite as extravagant. We're not seeing as many options, but we're seeing a good amount of food and very filling options. So there's rice soup to start with, and then there's roast beef and potatoes and pickles and cheese. So it's not nothing. They're, as opposed to having to bring your own food and plates and cutlery, it's definitely a better option, I think. And the third class was really happy with it too. On a lot of the third class accounts, people say yeah, the food was great. We got fed. What a joy. And a lot of the food that we saw on the Titanic was very 1900s, 1910s of peaches and chartreuse jelly and chicken lyonnaise and smoked herring for breakfast, Waldorf pudding and a French ice cream. Like, it was a lot of that type of food, like very heavily French influenced, because that's like what everyone thought was very fancy at the time. It's just so interesting to see what people in, 1912 were like, this is so fancy. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they're wrong. It was like, this experience was unlike anything else. If you were somebody who got like a parlor suite, which is basically just like a full blown house on the ship, like what we see in the Titanic movie, that would run you like $50,000 in today's money for 6 days. So it's what they paid for was what they got, for sure. And I was always just fascinated by it. And they got special stoves built to have all like these multi burner ranges, and so much work had to be put in to prepare meals for so many people. And that's always fascinated me. So even just getting to learn a little bit about it was so interesting. And I know this isn't a super like through line historical episode. It's kind of more just like facts about the Titanic, but I was just so fascinated by it. And I thought you guys might be too. So I wanted to share, especially because we're a little bit getting into spooky season and the Titanic is spooky. I guess that's it. I do want to give a special shout out to the Tasting History YouTube channel. The host there is Max. He had so much information in his videos and they were so fun. He actually makes some of the recipes that were on the Titanic. Definitely check out his thing. I got a lot of my information from him. Yeah, I just hope you guys have the best day and the best week. Thank you guys for being patient about this episode being a day late. I really appreciate it. I just wasn't feeling very well yesterday. So I needed a little day to rest and it all worked out because here we are. A day late, but not $1 short, from soup to nuts. Anyway, please make sure that y'all check out my Patreon. There are tiers starting as low as $2. That's the little producers tier. It helps me out so much. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Please, please, please leave in the comments what food history you would like to learn about next, because I can't wait to learn about it with you. And I can't wait to take a bite out of history with you next week. Goodbye.